Hello and welcome to the MHEC and the WCET, UPCEA, and Online Learning Consortium set of August webinars on distance education. Right now you're looking at a screen that will give you a little more information about the nature of the webinar, where you can call if you're having technical difficulties, and the format of the webinar, where you can find it afterwards. The webinar you've joined is State Authorization for Distance Education, the Future of Reciprocity. Today we are joined by SARA National, Regional, and State staff leaders and members. We want to give our acknowledgement and thanks to the Lumina Foundation. They have funded our implementation for the last year and continue in this second grant year to do so. We want to thank our collaborators. Those of you who are joining us after having watched the WCET, OLC, and UPCEA webinar last week, thank you for hanging in there for 2 of these. And thank you once again to our collaborators who helped us decide on the topics and make sure that we weren't redundant. I'm Jenny Parks. I'll be introducing myself in a minute. But first of all, I want to make sure that we acknowledge the people who give us our technical and logistical support. We're being run today by Mary Robertson here at Midwestern Higher Education Compact, and Emily Jacobson, the coordinator for the Midwest SARA agreement. We're also joined today by Marshall Hill, the Executive Director of the National Council for State Authorization Reciprocity, and Alan Contreras, the coordinator for the National Council for State Authorization Reciprocity Agreements. We have our 4 regional directors today. There's me, Jenny Parks. I'm the Midwestern Regional Director. We're also joined by Sandra Duran, I think is correct, the Northeastern Regional Director, Mary Larson, the Southern Regional Director, and our newest Regional Director. Welcome on board, John. This is John Lopez. He is our Western or WICHE Regional Director. We also have from the Indiana Commission for Higher Education our resident expert on the complaint process, Sarah Appel. And we have Tanya Spilavoy from our North Dakota State Portal Agency, making sure that the voice of the state and the portal agency is represented today in the questions and answers. So let's get right to it. We have a total of 90 minutes today. We have 3 parts. The first 30 minutes will be devoted to Part 1, an update on SARA across the nation. Part 2 will be another 30 minutes, the key distance education activities SARA will address. And Part 3, questions and answers. And the way we will do that is I will be reading your questions that come through on the chats you're typing. We're already getting a lot of questions. Thank you for those. And we will be, I'll be asking different co-presenters to talk to you about those. Any unanswered questions will come to you in the form of a document that we hope to get to you in the next 5 days. Just to reiterate some of these points for those of you who are joining us late, we will all try to respond to chat questions as much as we can, but most of them we'll answer verbally at the end or in a follow-up document. If you have joined us in the past, you know what these documents look like. You will receive them shortly after the webinar, within a week. And they were also, the webinar follow-up chats and the questions from the last webinar were part of the materials that came to you prior to this webinar. It'll also be recorded and posted to the MEC website and to YouTube as they usually are. All right, so let's get started with Part 1. An update on SARA across the nation, and we will start with some general background information from our Executive Director, Marshall Hill.
Thank you. Thank you, Jenny. Welcome, everybody. We're pleased to be here and talk with you about something that's quite important to us, we believe. As you will see in just the next slides, we're already having states join the SARA initiative. At the moment, we have 9 states which are fully joined, and we expect to have somewhere around 20 states by the end of 2014 and 40 to 45 by the end of 2015. Actually, that's moving along quicker than those of us who started this work would have ever dreamed possible. On our website, which is nc-sara.org, there is present a map. And the map shows the states that have joined the SARA initiative. They've already been approved by the regional compacts as member states in SARA. When you access this on our website, you'll be able to put your mouse over any particular state, click on it, and you will see the institutions in that state that have joined at the moment. We also have on our website something that gets a lot of attention. This is a table of state actions regarding SARA. We get asked a lot of questions about, has state A joined, or is my state considering joining, or where are we in the process? So that's why we put this together. You'll note that it has 5 columns, one listing the state, and then specific actions that have been taken. There is not a single state in which there is not active discussion about SARA, but we decided that we would report only the actual actions that states had taken. So the first column indicates that legislation has been introduced in a particular state, legislation passed, and in our parlance that means it has passed both houses of a legislature and been signed by a governor. The NA in that column means that that particular state has determined that it does not need to change its statutes in order to enable its participation in SARA. That applies to about 5 or so states. The next step is for a state to complete its application, which is available on our website, and then provide it to its regional compact. The last column indicates whether or not the regional compact has approved the particular state as a SARA state. This is actually the last time you'll see this chart in this way. We're modifying that, so the last column will indicate the date at which the state was approved as a SARA state. So this is updated continually on our website. There is an opportunity there to download a PDF version of it and print it. If you were to click on one of the states on the prior map that I showed you, you'd see something like this. So this is the drill down for North Dakota. It indicates the institutions in North Dakota that have joined SARA. We will list institutions on our website after we receive their payment. So institutions that are approved by their state are provided the information about how to submit their payments to NC-SARA. Once they do that, we list those institutions in this format, and a person is able to put their mouse over the particular institution's name, click on that, and get further information about that institution. So I think at this point we'll go to the regional compact directors with a little more detail on how we expect SARA to roll out in the coming months.
Thank you, Marshall. This is Jenny again from the Midwest region. Just in case, I wanted to point out something. For those of you who might get confused on who is speaking when, we do have our photos in the bottom right-hand corner if that helps at all. That was a suggestion from a listener 2 webinars ago, and we have found it very useful. So a little shout out and a thank you to that person. Okay, so let's go in alphabetical order. Well, I guess I didn't get it in alphabetical order for the Midwest. All right, well, Illinois. They have it's just been very recently that the Illinois governor has signed the legislation approving the SARA legislation in Illinois. We anticipate receiving their state application this fall, and actually that they will likely be able to accept applications from their institutions later this fall. Indiana was the first state to join back in February, and there are more than 15 Indiana institutions that have already joined SARA. In Iowa, the portal agency is working on taking the existing legislation, which passed last spring and which the governor also signed, and making it into a workable portal agency. We've already received a number of questions about Iowa. There will be, I'll do some more discussion of Iowa later, But there are just a few hiccups in that process that we're hoping to resolve as quickly as possible. We're just not exactly sure how to cure those hiccups yet, different cures for different things. So in Kansas, we anticipate receiving their state application any day, and we anticipate that shortly thereafter they will accept applications from their institutions. Michigan, we think that they might get some legislation introduced later this fall. I know that they're currently drafting it. If they did, it would take some time in the spring to pass that legislation and get a portal agency open, hopefully by next summer. Minnesota has its legislation enacted August 1st, and they are looking at the Office of Higher Education at going ahead and converting legislation into a portal agency. We're hoping to see that unfold this fall as well. Missouri is getting close. They are going through their process of writing rules, and again, we expect that application and that portal agency to be up and running this fall. Nebraska has just become one of the two most recent states to join SARA, along with Montana, and Nebraska is already accepting applications from its institutions. There's going to be a Nebraska institutional workshop on September 3rd to help those institutions that want to have some hands-on experience and some time with a SARA staff member to complete those applications. North Dakota was our second state to join. They're doing great, and that's why Tanya's with us today. She can answer some questions as one of our more seasoned portal agency leaders at this point. In Ohio, they are creating a portal agency out of their legislation now too, and again, it's still on track for all of that to happen this fall. They have kind of a long process where they have to go through a few iterations of where the public can review for comment. So we think that the Ohio portal will be open probably around January. South Dakota, like North Dakota, belongs to both WICHE and MHEC. And so the two compacts split the difference. We got North Dakota, and South Dakota is joining WICHE, and John will be able to tell you about the status of SARA there. Wisconsin, it has a very decentralized higher education system, so they're still looking at and examining the best way to move towards SARA, and so we continue to provide them with support and information. Pennsylvania is not a member of MHEC, but has been talking to MHEC about affiliating for SARA purposes, and there are a number of efforts underway there, some that are initiated by different sectors of the higher ed community, and again, we share information and support with them as they figure out how they want to proceed. Okay, now we're going to move on to an update from the Northeast. Sandy.
Thank you very much, Jenny. I appreciate it. So the slide that you have in front of you, oops, I'm sorry. Let me briefly go through each of the New England states. So you should have slide 25 in front of you now. The first state is Connecticut. Connecticut passed legislation in the spring that requires the Office of Higher Education to put forth a plan by January 1st. We then expect the plan to be implemented and the state to join later that year and institutions thereafter. Maine has a very abbreviated session. They only meet from January 1st until late in the spring. There was a lot of discussion in Maine this year about the legislation, and we believe that there is strong support and that it will pass in the next session, which begins in January. Massachusetts, there's a lot of interest from the institutions. We're collaborating with the institutions and the Department of Education, public and private institutions, to educate all about the benefits of SARA and to help strategize and educate on how to move forward. New Hampshire, last year, 2013, they became our first New England state to pass legislation. They are currently restructuring their department, and so we expect a committee recommendation in the fall about how to best proceed there, but we expect institutions to be applying the beginning of next year. Rhode Island, again, has a relatively short session, and so we are meeting and educating with legislators, institutions, public and private, as well as state agencies. And that will proceed the first part of next year. Vermont legislation was passed in the 2014 legislative session. We expect a SARA application either latest this year or more likely in the spring, with institutions to follow thereafter. New Jersey and New York, like Pennsylvania, are not affiliated with any particular compact. So for purposes of SARA, we are talking with them because, as many of you may know, you must be affiliated with a compact in order to join SARA. Institutions as well as the departments have expressed interest, and we continue to educate them on the benefits of SARA. Okay, thank you. Mary?
Oh, thank you, Sandy, and everybody. Welcome. I'd like to give just a little update on the SREB region. As you may or may not know, in the SREB region, we have what's called SREB's Electronic Campus Regional Reciprocity Agreement, and for short, we reference it as SECRA. We've had SECRA in existence since the launch of the Electronic Campus in 1998. SREB stands firmly behind SARA, and therefore our states are in a process of transitioning from what we currently have to SARA. In many situations, the state does need to change legislation because the legislation specifically references the electronic campus. So that's one of the reasons we're joining, and I'll talk about the states that are joining, but that's also our states are switching from something they already have to SARA. Okay, let's go ahead, and with Alabama, conversations are ongoing, especially amongst institutions, but Alabama has a complicated approval process, and therefore we anticipate they will not be joining in the next 12 months. But the conversations are ongoing. Arkansas is one of the states, as noted, that they do not need legislative change, but they are working through their regulatory policies to make sure that they cover all their bases, and we anticipate receiving their SARA application by the end of December or the first part of the year, with institutional applications being accepted in July 2015. There we go. Delaware. Conversations are ongoing with both the institutions in Delaware as well as the state agencies, and they had their state meeting last spring, and we anticipate the Delaware Department of Education will be the SARA portal agency, but they do need to have their legislation changed, and they anticipate submitting legislation this year with a possible effective date of July 2015. Florida is another one of the states that their legislation action will be required, and the state university system is anticipated to be the SARA portal agency, and there's conversations going on in the state of Florida with both the institutions as well as the agencies. And we're always encouraged when the conversations are going on. That's always a great sign. Georgia and Kentucky, again, its legislation needs to be passed, and so they anticipate having legislation go through the sessions this year. And in the state of Georgia, there is a separate, the regulatory agency is separate from the SHEO agency, and they are working together as they did with SECRA to join SARA. Kentucky will be led, Kentucky's participation will be led by institutions, and we anticipate that they'll be joining within the next 18 months because, again, legislation is expected. Louisiana, they needed to have legislation, and legislation has been presented. They anticipate having that legislation signed this fall, and this fall I expect to receive their SARA application. Institutions would probably not be joining immediately, but right around the first of the year. Maryland is a state that does need legislative change, but there are conversations going on there both among institutions as well as their agency individuals. Mississippi, hang on, try one more time. Mississippi, legislation action will be required, and there are conversations ongoing. In North Carolina, the Board of Governors will be the authority that makes the decision on participation, and they anticipate it being an agenda item in the fall of 2014. There will need to be additional memos of understandings between agencies, but there are conversations ongoing with both the agencies and the institutions. Oklahoma, and they anticipate submitting their application early this spring, probably around February, with institution acceptance in March or sometime this spring. They have looked at their legislation and the regulatory issues, and they will not need to make changes to their legislature. South Carolina will need to have legislative change, but there are conversations ongoing among all the stakeholders. Tennessee, again, will need to have legislative action, and the conversations are going on at all levels. Texas, once again, needs to have legislative change, but there are conversations going on, and they actually anticipate submitting legislation this year in the 2015 session, but they may not be able to join until late in 2015, depending on when it comes out of session. Virginia and West Virginia both anticipate participation by the end of this year and submitting their applications, with institutions participating this coming spring. Virginia did need to have legislative change, and they passed that bill, and they should be submitting their application within the next couple months. West Virginia did not need to have legislation, and they too will be submitting their application. In many cases, the state wants to make sure that they have their institutional process completely in place before they submit their SARA applications so that they can move forward with accepting those applications. And in other cases, they're going to submit the application first and then implement the institutional process. Thus, sometimes there is a time lag when institutions participate versus when the SARA application comes through. One of the like a couple of the other states that will be affiliating with a region for participation in SARA, District of Columbia will be affiliating with SREB, and we are working closely with them. They do have a decision on who their portal agency will be, and we anticipate having their application, SARA application, the start of spring. And John, I'll send it over to you.
Thank you, Mary. Welcome, everyone. Happy to join you today. I'm going to quickly run through the WCET region, starting with Alaska, which was approved in the spring. We have not yet accepted institutions from that state, but those applications should be coming in within the next several weeks once a particular waiting period is complete or for regulatory changes to take effect. Arizona, we had a great meeting last week with the representatives of the three entities that will be ensuring SARA participation for that state. We expect the application to come in early October. California, I've seen many of you in the chat ask questions about California. I think many are aware that there's some interesting situations going on in California. We are aware of them. Conversations continue about how to move SARA to the state of California. We've noticed a significant amount of interest. We've been in touch with many of the entities and stakeholders that would be critical to making that happen. You probably know the legislation is going to be necessary, and we are all in discussions about how to make that happen. So efforts are geared toward trying to get some legislation in California in the spring. Colorado, already a member state. We've already accepted institutions within that state, so that's moving along nicely. Hawaii, legislation has been passed. The state is in a position to join SARA, working through some of the regulatory concerns and structures. We expect that sometime in 2015 we should see an application from that state. Idaho approved as a WICHE member earlier this year, as a SARA member earlier this year. Montana just last week was approved. Nevada approved earlier this spring, and we are already accepting applications from that state. New Mexico just recently had discussions with members from the Department of Higher Ed there. There's a bill in place. We think we are in good position to have that introduced early in the legislative session. As Jenny mentioned earlier, North Dakota is part of M-SARA. They're in good shape as it relates to becoming as a SARA member state. Oregon, we're happy to have staff with SARA who is very familiar with the state of Oregon. There's a meeting coming up in 2 weeks where we anticipate a very positive meeting that will lead to an application and Oregon becoming a SARA member by the end of the year. The Pacific Territory, we've been not as quick to involve them in discussions as it relates to SARA yet, but that certainly is a focus area for us in the upcoming year. South Dakota has a number of tribal institutions and other which presents interesting situations for us, but we've worked through those quite well, and because of the staff there and here at WICHE, we are confident we'll have an application from the state of South Dakota in early October, and they should be a member by the end of the year. Utah legislatively is already authorized. There are discussions going on at the state level among departments to determine how best to implement it from a regulatory standpoint. And we expect those to get ironed out in 2015. Washington is an approved member, and we have institutions already applying and approved from that state. In Wyoming, we're working on legislation to be introduced in early of 2015. So happy to answer any questions afterward, particularly many of you who have questions about California. Look forward to speaking with you.
All right, thank you for the update, everyone. Many of the questions, I would say at least 50% that we get do pertain to the actual status of how SARA will unfold in the state. So I'm hoping this gave you guys a really good opportunity to hear from all the regional directors. This is the first time we've done that, and it's really exciting. So I have to thank you all again for participating in this. So we're on to part 2 now. A lot of the questions that are coming through, and then as you've seen as I've responded to as many of you as I could, pertain to the key distance education activities that SARA will and by default will not address. So now we're going to hear most of our comments from Marshall Hill and Alan Contreras, and we'll have some specific tactical information about the complaint process from the lady who runs complaint processing for the state of Indiana, and they have a fantastic complaint process, Sarah Appel. So right now I'm going to turn it over to Marshall and let him begin to describe to you what SARA can do for your institution.
Well, SARA is a new concept, and we've worked very hard on it. We don't solve all problems, but we do think we provide a very good opportunity for institutions to expand their offerings and for students to receive them. We built SARA on the way we do things in the United States, with a reliance on the states, on the federal government, and on accreditation. Institutions that participate in SARA must be accredited institutions, accredited by an accrediting body recognized by the U.S. Secretary of Education. We try to avoid duplicating functions that are already taken into account by accreditation processes. SARA also requires institutions to be financially stable. Public institutions are presumed to be financially stable because they can rely upon the financial backing of their state. Frankly, I cannot think of a single public institution that has ever closed because of lack of financial support from its state. There have been consolidations and so forth, but not those kinds of catastrophic closures. SARA also collapses into a more manageable set the various physical presence triggers that many states have to determine when they will choose to regulate your institution. We provide for experiential learning placements. Frankly, some people would prefer that we had not done this. The rationale, though, is that for many, many years now, research has shown that students that have some sort of experiential component in their learning process learn better. They stay in school longer, they graduate at higher rates, and so forth. So to not allow some element of that for courses and programs delivered online just doesn't seem consistent with what we know about maximizing student learning. One of the big problems in distance education are misunderstandings or failures to provide information about what a particular course of study will provide for a student. Will it or will it not prepare a student to sit for licensure in a particular field? Right now, that's sort of a patchwork of things. SARA requires institutions to provide that information to students to let them know whether or not the program that they are enrolled in will or will not prepare the student for licensure. Alan will talk a little bit more about that later. We are finalizing our expectations for institutions that participate in SARA. They will be required to provide some information to the NC-SARA organization. We're going to ask those institutions to report the numbers of students that they have enrolled via distance education in states other than their own. We will report them by state for SARA states and in aggregate for all the other non-SARA states. We are going to ask states that participate in SARA to report by institution the number of complaints about institutions that have not been resolved at the institutional level but have been appealed to the state's SARA portal agency. We will have more complete information about all of that out late this year. One of the important provisions of SARA is a rational way for students to get their complaints addressed. And we're going to have some more discussion about that later on in the webinar here. And also some process for students who are enrolled in institutions which close unexpectedly and so forth. Needs to be some insurance for all of that. So what we have attempted to do with the physical presence issues are to reduce the wide variety of them to a few fundamentals. So if your institution provides only online courses and programs in other SARA states, that will be covered by the SARA agreement. You would not have to seek separate approval to offer those in those other SARA states. Also be allowed some quite limited and specified on-the-ground instruction in those other SARA states without having to achieve separate approvals. Clinical experiential learning activities are outlined, a certain amount of marketing. If you were to employ an adjunct instructor in another SARA state, that would not trigger physical presence in a SARA state. If your institution owned or managed or leased a computer server in another SARA state, that would not require you to achieve separate approval from that other SARA state as well. There are some provisions for a limited amount of on-the-ground face-to-face instruction. I think that's mainly to acknowledge the fact that It benefits students often to get them together for a brief period of time. There also is a provision for short courses, that is, courses that take less than 20 hours of face-to-face instruction. All of this is elaborated at greater detail on our website, which is nc-sara.org. In there you'll find some expanded material on these issues, plus a series of FAQs which explore some others of them at greater length. I think at this point we'll turn it over to Alan.
Thank you, Marshall. I just wanted to spend a little time talking about professional licensure and clinical practica and that package of issues. We get quite a few questions about this. Right now, what SARA says is that in order to be covered by SARA, you can't have a contract with a clinical site that lasts more than a year, and you can't have more than 10 students at that site. It is very clear to us that this is not going to work very well, and is in fact not very well aligned with what is standard practice in most fields. We are therefore going to propose to the National Council at its meeting late this fall some provisions that will loosen up these requirements quite a bit and make them align a little better with the norms of what actually happens out there. Probably the most important thing to keep in mind is that although SARA will allow you to operate interstate and have clinicals and practica in those states without triggering the state's normal physical presence requirement, and therefore getting the education agency on you to get registered or licensed or whatever, you will be exempt from that kind of thing under SARA. However, you will not be exempt from any specific requirements that are placed on clinical and practica sites by a professional licensing board. For example, if a board of nursing or a teacher standards board or a psych board or something like that has a specific requirement that is a professional requirement that you have to meet in order to be at a site, in order to host students in practica, that kind of thing, that is not going to be exempt under SARA, and you will still have to meet requirements of that nature. So that's probably the most important thing to keep in mind, is that these things, these things are not exactly the same. You will be exempt from the generic educational oversight requirements. You will not be exempt from the requirements of the professional licensing agency. The other thing to keep in mind is that there is built into SARA a notice requirement to students, and that is that right now, if a student signs up for a professional program, I don't mean when they become a student or when they take a class, but when they make clear their intent to go into a professional program that generally leads to licensure, under SARA, the institution is obligated to notify that student in one of two ways. The first way is they can tell the student that in the student's home state, the student is or is not eligible to be licensed in that profession through that program. The other way is that they can notify the student that the institution does not have current information on whether that student in their home state can be licensed after having taken the online program. But if they do that, they have to give the student the contact information for the professional licensing agency in the student's home state so that the student can find out whether that program will work for them or not. So those are the steps that have to be taken. And the student has to be notified directly. Right now, the SARA staff is discussing the best way to build in things like web-based lists of agencies and things of that nature. We're going to try to make what we do track with what's actually happening out there in the real world. But right now, at this point, the institution has an obligation to provide this information directly to the student when a student from another, who is a resident of another state, signs up with the program. So that is basically how that works, and certainly if you have questions about that, go ahead and send them in and we will answer them to the best of our abilities.
Hi, this is Sarah Appel, and I'm going to talk about a compliant complaint. In Indiana, we actually keep track of the complaints that come in, and we have a really good database on those to help us track and look at trends and different things. Besides the obvious information that you would collect, such as the student's name, the institution, there are some essential pieces that make for a good complaint form. The first one is make sure you always direct the student to go through the institutional complaint process first. 9 out of 10 times student complaints can be handled through the institutional complaint process, plus it's the first step that really needs to be done. And we really stress that here in Indiana, and I know other states do as well, that is the student's first step, is to go through that complaint process at the institution. The next part is to make sure that you let students know what kind of complaints you can review. Sometimes we get complaints from students about grades or ADA compliance. We always refer them to specific agencies that handle those, since we do not do that. Every once in a while, students will want to file a complaint that's anonymous. That doesn't really work out well for several reasons. Namely, for the student, if you're contacting us to find some kind of solution or for us to investigate something, we need to know sometimes your student records, and you have to give us permission to discuss things. So we need your name. And it's only fair to the institution to know where this complaint is coming from. There we go. Another piece that we always make sure that we have is a statute of limitation. We don't want students that says, yeah, I took an online class 10 years ago and I've got a complaint. We here in Indiana, we have a 2-year limit. And I know that other states have 1 year. We like the 2-year because sometimes it takes a while for things to get to a point where they realize that there is a problem or there has been a problem. We always provide an estimated time frame for a response. A lot of students think that if I submit my complaint, I'm going to have an answer in 2 or 3 days. But to process a good complaint can take anywhere between 2 and 3 weeks, sometimes longer, depending on how complicated it is. So we always give them a time frame for a response. If the institution needs additional time, they're very good at letting us know that, and we always let the student know so-and-so institution has requested another week to look into your case, and this is the new date. We always close with an affirmation statement that is pretty general and also gives the SHEO or the portal agency the ability to share information with that institution in question so that the investigation can be completed. We want to make sure that we don't violate any FERPA laws or we just want to make sure that we follow the law to the letter on student privacy. So there are always types of complaints when and where they're eligible and not eligible. Complaints that might come to the state portal agency if they aren't resolved include recruiting and marketing practices that students might deem to be unfair, a lack of credit transferability, and violation of the SREB guidelines, which are pretty easy to follow. So I'm very happy that they're pretty clear. Title IV financial aid complaint, we always direct them to the U.S. Department of Education. Grade disputes, again, remain at the institution and don't come to the portal agency. Conduct disputes, any kind of removal or suspension doesn't come to us. Again, disability accommodations, compliance, we always direct them to the OCR for discrimination. Other types of complaints might be accreditation, hey, they changed degree plans in midstream. Again, disability, dismissal, we don't address any of those. The next slide is actually an example of how we have them numbered. In Indiana, we actually have a complaint code system so that when we run our data, we can see, oh, 5.2 federal loans, and this is how many complaints we've had on this. It has proven very helpful. We report to our commission on our complaints, so they kind of know what the state is. And the institutions like to see if there are any trends, like, boy, we're not doing really good in X, Y, and Z, and we always get a complaint about this. So that's been very helpful as well. Again, this is just a sample of what our complaint code system looks like. Again, complaints that we don't do would be grades. We have received complaints on post-graduation job opportunities. Again, we don't do them on probation of any sort. We have received some on quality of education. Sometimes students feel that the education that they've received is not what they thought it was going to be or what they were told, which kind of goes into recruiting and marketing practices. And, of course, release of transcripts. Other things that we can look at would be transfer of credits, which is very important in Indiana since we have the core transfer library. So we take transfer of credits very seriously. Withdrawal process, sometimes that can be very confusing. And of course there's those other complaints that we can't even imagine that are out there because it's education is a big arena and a lot of things can happen. But fortunately our institutions pretty much always want to do the right thing, and we appreciate that. But we always leave that other open in case something comes up that we haven't thought of. So I'll turn it over to part 3.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for that information. We are on schedule, which is great. We actually are a little ahead of schedule, so we'll have some time for our questions. I've been trying to answer as many of them as I could along the way here, so please chat in with additional ones. I'm going to go back to the top of the list here and choose some of the ones that are kind of less specific and I think will have a broader appeal, and then I'm going to ask our various speakers who have expertise in these matters to be the ones to address some of these concerns. So one of the kind of a consistent theme are some questions about the interaction of SARA and the Department of Education. One of the questions, I'll read several of the questions, and then I do believe Marshall's going to be the best one to answer these questions. Here's one. Some of the states I've worked with have been rather negative about reciprocity, saying there's no evidence that Department of Education will approve it. What do you think of that? I don't know if you have an answer to that right away. Marshall, here's another one. We were told that the federal requirement to get individual state approval was put off until 2018. Is that correct? It states that they are pleased, well, this person says they're pleased with this story from Inside Higher Ed, that the delay in regulation is good because not all institutions are at that point with their state authorizations that they can risk losing financial aid. Marshall, did you want to tell us a little bit about that process?
Sure. Before I do, I want to emphasize again that state authorization is principally about abiding by the laws that the various states have enacted to deal with institutions from outside the state that want to educate students in their states. So states have had those laws for decades. They will have them for a long time. State authorization got the attention of a lot of institutions when the U.S. Department of Education issued a rule in 2010 saying that institutions that enrolled students in other states needed to get the approval of those other states if that was needed, or be able to demonstrate that no such approval was required. And secondly, they said that the institution needed to be able to demonstrate that they had achieved those approvals or gone through that process to the department if the department asked them to. That rule was vacated, means tossed out by the courts on procedural grounds, and right now there is no rule at the U.S. Department of Ed about this issue of post-secondary distance education authorization. There was a negotiated rulemaking panel that was assembled at the first part of this year. I participated in that. We met from, I believe, February to May, and state authorization was under consideration there. The panel did not reach agreement on a rule, and Ted Mitchell, the Undersecretary in charge of post-secondary distance education, has indicated that the Department is pausing, that's his word, pausing at this time on issuing such a rule. That is a rule about this state authorization of distance education. I believe there's some indication that they will issue a rule sometime probably in the spring about that. Different people have different views about what they will do. The department, senior staff in the U.S. Department of Ed have consistently supported the work that we're doing on SARA. Had several discussions about this with Martha Cantor when she was in a significant role there, and with Undersecretary Mitchell as well. They are not, in my judgment, going to specify SARA in any kind of rule that they propose, but I believe they will continue to support, as they did during this negotiated rulemaking session, the process of reciprocity, and say something along the lines of the department will recognize an institution's membership in a state-to-state reciprocity agreement as sufficient documentation of its approval to operate under the provisions of that agreement in the states party to such an agreement. That sounds terribly complicated, but mainly I believe the department will continue to bless the approach to solving this issue that they have consistently since we started working on it. Finally, there has been some suspicion in some quarters that SARA is a federal initiative. It is not a federal initiative. It has not been funded by the U.S. Department of Education. We have kept them advised on our progress. It does not depend upon actions by the department in order to be successful, because mainly it's designed to deal with the patchwork of state laws. Could the department theoretically do something to damage our efforts? Sure, but I think the likelihood of them doing that is just vanishingly small. We are accomplishing far more than they have been able to accomplish on this issue for a while, and they've been very supportive publicly and privately about what we're doing.
Hey, that's great, Marshall. We want to check in with some folks here. We had a notice of some type of technical difficulty in internet connection. We want to make sure that we still have our participants. Can someone give us a note?
This is Alan in Boulder. I can still hear the sound, but I am unable to send messages at this point.
Okay.
And I'm losing signal again here.
All right. How about the folks at Ready Talk? Are you able to help us with this? We're trying to figure out if we still have connections with all of our people.
You're coming through clear.
Okay. Can you tell if they can still hear us and if they are still seeing the PowerPoint, because we're not able to interact with the chats and the questions at this point?
We're getting a network connection error.
I will, as we try to work on some of these technical difficulties, for any of you who are out there, another set of the questions concern whether or not and how SARA will address the issue of non-credit coursework, continuing education coursework, and even non-degree programs. And I'm thinking once again, this is going to be something that mainly Alan and Marshall will be able to address for us. Would either of you like to take on that topic?
Sure, I can say a couple of words about that. This is Alan. The way SARA works is that if you are an accredited degree-granting institution and you start participating in SARA, that covers things you do in addition to your degree programs. For example, it would cover certain kinds of interstate non-degree activity, things of that nature, whether or not it's part of a degree program or not. So that is definitely covered under SARA. We had an inquiry a moment ago from someone asking if you had to be accepting Title IV aid to be a participant in SARA. The answer to that is no. You have to be accredited by a federally recognized accreditor, and you have to be a degree-granting institution. If you don't accept federal aid and therefore you don't have a federal financial responsibility score, then SARA allows you to have your home state, in effect, certify your financial responsibility by using the same model that the federal government would have used. So those are a couple of the questions that have now that have come up that I hope somebody is hearing me answer them, because I'm doing my best.
Thank you, Alan. This is Jenny. I think there are people out there still connected. And regarding that financial score, yes, we've had some institutions already apply that don't have that score, and apparently a lot of the independent auditors are familiar with it and can make that calculation for a school that doesn't receive that score. So that would be something to ask if you are a school that is in that position. Okay, another set of questions is coming up about regional patterns in adoption of SARA laws, and why they are observing some of these differences. I can think that some of the regional directors might want to address that, or Marshall and Alan. Is there someone in there who'd like to jump in?
Well, this is Marshall. I will start. Let's talk about the South for just a moment. Mary made the point earlier, but I want to make it again. SREB has been a leader in attempting to develop reciprocity agreements for the sharing of online courses and programs in the South. And many institutions have participated in that. And many states participate, and they like the program. SECRA is limited to regionally accredited institutions, whereas SARA allows participation by nationally accredited institutions. SARA also SECRA does not allow for-profit institutions to participate, and SARA does. So states in the South have to think through these issues, and it takes a while. I'm convinced that we will have many SARA states coming from the SREB region, within the next several months. So regional cultures and institutional cultures are evident in our country, and I think the areas that I would have originally thought would be the most fertile for early adoption of SARA have actually turned out to be exactly that.
Thank you, Marshall. All right, we have another interesting another set of questions where I'm getting more than one of them. I've had a couple of questions now about the regulation of online education for international students, essentially students living outside the U.S. coming to a U.S. institution. I've been able to answer some of these, but we have enough of them now that I think they're probably going to be an important thing to address for a wider audience. And I do believe Alan is the main one, and possibly Marshall, who can address this, both as it relates to SARA, which it really doesn't relate to SARA at this point, and to state authorization in general. Do either one of you have some comments there?
Well, right now, though, this is Alan. The way SARA is set up, it covers only distance education that is offered from one U.S. state or territory into another U.S. state or territory. There is no provision in SARA that allows for international activity to come in. And one of the things to keep in mind with that is that if you are a U.S. provider, particularly a for-profit provider, and you own an entity that is in Canada or in the Caribbean or somewhere else, the mere fact that you are a U.S. institution does not mean that distance ed activity that comes from Canada or from the Caribbean is eligible for SARA. It is not. The physical source of the distance ed activity to be covered by SARA must be from, it must have to come from a U.S. state or territory. And that, we actually had a couple of questions about that, and that's the way that works.
And this is Marshall, and that's because SARA is fundamentally an agreement between states, and states need to have some authority over the institutions that they are approving to participate in SARA. Theoretically, if we accomplish all we would like to accomplish, and our good friends north of the border want to talk with us about including Canada or something like that, you know, theoretically that's something we could consider in the future. But right now, Alan is completely correct. SARA deals with distance education offered from state to state or district to territory, and not foreign.
Thank you, Marshall and Alan. We have a question about whether recruiting will be considered as physical presence under SARA. I know Alan has been working on this. Do you have some comments for us, Alan?
Yes. The original National Commission report and the other baseline work that was done on SARA 2 or 3 years ago, all of those included recruiting in the list of things that would be covered by whatever eventual form the agreement took. When the SARA staff, that would be me, drafted the policies and standards last fall, recruiting was for some reason left off that list. That should not have happened. The intent was that if you are recruiting for activities that are legal under SARA, then you should be covered under SARA. For that reason, the staff is working on a proposal to take to the National Council at the late fall meeting that would clarify that and put recruiting activities back in. One of the questions that we get fairly often is whether that's going to cover everything that somebody does, college fairs and all this kind of thing, a lot of which may not relate to distance education at all. Right now, the way we're approaching it is that it would not. But this is kind of a complicated issue, and we're going to just do our best to come up with something. But recruiters are intended to be covered in the future, and that's an oversight on our part, and we're going to try to fix it.
Wonderful, Alan. Thank you very much. We do have a series of questions on experiential learning. People are wanting some clarification on what exactly constitutes an experiential learning. Experiential learning that is defined under SARA as something that will not trigger physical presence and therefore the need for the traditional authorization process. There are some specific questions about how this would relate to medical education, and there are also some questions about if under SARA there would still be the need to report the number of students in placements at various places coming from different institutions. I know that would really be that'd be an Alan and a Marshall question once again.
Well, it's kind of a big hairball of a question, but I'll just address the parts of it that I feel I can. What SARA does with clinicals and practica in every field is simply say that if you are going from one state to another to do this, and both states are SARA member states, the normal physical presence triggers of the receiving state would not be operational, and that state would not have the ability to require that the institution get the kind of license or approval that it might have to do under the normal state law. It does not have, pardon me, SARA has no effect on requirements by professional licensing boards. It has no effect on federal requirements that may be completely outside that. All SARA does is say that the only state government that you have to be authorized by in order to do these things is that of your home state.
Thanks, Alan. I have another question. Is marketing covered by SARA, and what forms of marketing and for which programs?
Yes, marketing for any distance ed or online type of program is covered by SARA. You can have billboards, newspaper, whatever it is you want to do. SARA does not cover marketing that is unique to your on-the-ground requirements in your on-the-ground programs in the home state or at the main campus. But you can advertise or promote the distance ed activities pretty much any way you want to.
Thank you. We have
Jenny,
a question about... Yes.
Jenny, let me just add a little bit to Alan's answer to that one. This is Marshall. Yes, you do have under SARA considerable flexibility and freedom to provide information about your offerings and so forth. But some of our colleagues who are state regulators have some concerns about the need for accuracy. We all are concerned about all of that. So any institution that, under the auspices of SARA, if they were to misrepresent the requirements of their programs, misrepresent some potential outcomes, tell outright lies, and so forth, SARA does not protect an institution from the consequences of those kinds of actions. Those kinds of things are still at the option of the receiving state's attorney general to deal with in whatever way they choose to deal with.
And in addition to that, this is Alan again. In addition to the state retaining those basic anti-fraud provisions, that kind of activity, saying things that are false about a program in all kinds of ways, those are internal violations of the policies and standards of SARA also. So an institution that did that would not only be subject to getting whacked by a variety of attorneys general, they would have a hard time hanging on to their eligibility to continue participating in SARA.
Thank you. That is clarifying. I appreciate it. We have a question here. Do you have an example of states that have compliant processes that meet SARA requirements? Yes, we do. All 9 states, the applications for which are posted on our websites. And if you have trouble accessing them, just give me a quick, shoot me a quick email, and I can make sure that you have examples of that information. Or just go to those state portal websites. All of their information should be there, and indeed is there for you. We have some questions about the professional licensure notifications. One of the questions indicates that there are some Department of Ed disclosures that are required, and how those do or don't look like the ones that we are requiring under SARA. Are you familiar with that at all, and do you have any comments for us, Alan?
Well, I am not familiar with those specifically, but SARA does not supersede any federal laws. SARA only supersedes conflicting laws in receiving states.
Okay, great. Here's a hypothetical question. If a school sponsors a conference that invites participants from worldwide, is this an activity that's covered under SARA? Alan?
You're talking about a conference that would be part of a program for which credit would be given, or there would be some kind of award?
It's unclear from the question, Alan. That was what I was going to say.
A conference by itself generally isn't part of an academic program. I suppose there are people who can get certain credit for attending them, but I'd have to see a more specific example and look at what it is they're trying to figure out.
Okay, that makes sense. If you have some more specific questions, the person who posed this question, please contact me or Alan, and we will get you hooked up with some answers once we know some of your specifics. Does anyone have an update on Puerto Rico?
I'm not sure which of the regional compacts they've been talking to, if any. I think they are. I think they're typically associated with the Middle States accreditation region, but I know next to nothing about them.
All right. Well, we'll have to find out, and we'll put that as one of the follow-up questions that we take care of. There's also a question about the relationship between M-SARA and advising legislatures. What is our role in getting these laws passed, and what kind of communication do we have with legislators and legislatures?
This is Marshall. We don't lobby, let's first say that, but we do provide a great deal of information. And the contacts with state legislatures are one of the big benefits that we have by having the regional compacts implement SARA. They have SREB was established in 1948, so the southern states have long established relationships with SREB. WICHE this year is celebrating its 60th anniversary. So these are long-standing organizations that have that receive funds from states. They have legislators that serve on their commissions, and so forth. That's true for all of the 4 regional compacts. When asked, we have appeared before legislative groups, legislative committees and panels, provided information. We've done that with institutional groups in many states as well. When I say we, I mean all of us, the regional SARA directors and myself. We keep a list on our website of upcoming presentations and activities, and I encourage you to do that. Most all states do have to change legislation in order to participate in SARA. Frankly, that's why some states appear to be slower. Not every legislature meets every year. Let's take Texas as an example. I'm confident that Texas will become a SARA state, but the Texas legislature is not in session in 2014, and legislation will need to be passed in Texas, and the soonest they could do that is 2015. There are a number of states that fit that provision.
Thank you, Marshall. Here we have another question about the complaint process. Did I understand you correctly that SARA's complaint process will not include complaints concerning recruiting or marketing practices? If so, where do these go?
That's a misunderstanding. I think there was something in that discussion that got slightly tangled. SARA does include complaints about those practices to the extent that they relate to any of the requirements of SARA. So that would be a perfectly normal thing. The principal exemptions from the complaint procedures would be student grades, student conduct complaints, and things that would normally be referred to the Office of Civil Rights or to the Department of Ed on like a straight-up financial aid problem. That there's nothing SARA can do about that. But certainly complaints about recruiting and claims made about programs and things of that nature would be covered by SARA.
Wonderful. Another complaint question. In brief, SARA will handle only complaints about whether institutions are meeting their policies, correct? All other complaints will be sent back to the institution or the proper oversight agency. Is that correct?
Well, that is correct, but if you look at what the SARA policies include, there are extensive provisions having to do with truthfulness in marketing and information about programs and state licensing and things of that nature. Plus, there's the entire set of what we call the CRAC standards, which are the best practices for distance education that all of the regional accreditors have adopted. So you might have to look around a little while to find a complaint about a program offering that would be sort of automatically disconnected from SARA. Now, that said, the way the SARA complaint process works is before the state portal agency can hear a complaint, about whether an institution is in violation of SARA, the complaint has to go all the way through the institution's internal complaint process. There's no way that somebody can just jump straight out to SARA and say this institution behaved wickedly without having first gone through the institution's own process and tried to resolve that internally.
Thank you, Alan.
Let me add a couple of things to that, Jenny. U.S. Department of Education regulations for federal financial aid require all institutions that participate in Title IV programs to have transparent and readily accessible student complaint processes. Most people are aware of that, and that's not a surprise. What many people don't know is that since October of 2010, U.S. Department of Education rules require states to have a statewide complaint resolution process that's accessible by all students attending Title IV eligible institutions. Some states have done a wonderful job on that, have given it a great deal of attention. Indiana, as we've heard earlier, is the star in that regard. Other states have just plain ignored it, and that's caused SARA some difficulties because we built our expectations on the federal requirements. And then to find some states saying, oh, you're requiring us to have a complaint resolution process. And our response is, well, actually, no, the U.S. Department of Ed requires that in order for your institutions to be able to participate in Title IV programs. So in some states, we're prompting some catch-up here and some discussions about things which should have been talked about 4 years ago, but are only now getting on the table.
Thank you for that. We have an interesting question here, and it's a kind of a larger question. Is it best for an institution for a state and an institution to wait for SARA to happen before going out and seeking individual authorizations in each of the other states? I know we all have our answer to this, so I'll give this. It's important until you are a member of SARA as a state and an institution that you make a good faith effort to be fully authorized in every state where you are required to do so. And that could be that you are required to register with the Secretary of State. You would be required to be authorized and registered with the licensing boards, and of course with any higher education authorizing entity in the state. Does anyone else have anything else to add?
This is Marshall. I want to second that and say waiting for SARA is not a satisfactory option. You need to go ahead, pursue whatever needed authorizations you have in any state in which you enroll students. And if you're just beginning that process and don't know really much about how to go about it, there is some helpful information found on the SHEO organization web page. That's www.sheo.org. Look under state authorization, and there'll be some initial starting points there. Another organization that can be very helpful to you is WCET. Just Google WCET, and you'll find a great deal of information about state authorization.
Thank you, Marshall. I'll also remind folks that most of those links are at the back of, are in the kind of the appendix slides on this particular PowerPoint if you need those references again. Okay, I think I have one more question that I'll submit to the panel, and then I will offer, as I have promised, a short update. We have a number of questions on the situation in Iowa because we have a number of people logged in from Iowa, and they've been monitoring this process very carefully. This question is, at one point there were talks about a discounted membership rate for institutions who applied and joined SARA early. Has there been any talk of extending this due to the delay in many states' legislatures not being able to pass the legislation and join SARA?
This is Marshall. No, we are not going to be able to extend that rate.
Okay, thank you, Marshall. Well, I actually have probably a couple more minutes that I can devote to some questions. Marshall indicated that SARA would cover institutions accredited by any Department of Education recognized body. Did he mean any Department of Education recognized body or only regional bodies? Well, I can answer that very, very easily. We mean those that are recognized by the Department of Ed. That's going to be national and regional accreditors. Any other comments on that one, Marshall?
No, that's correct. The process, we've received some people believe that SARA should only be available to regionally accredited institutions. My response to that is the problems we're trying to deal with in our country of less educational attainment than we want to have are so big that we need all hands on deck. Accrediting bodies are approved by the U.S. Secretary of Education after going through the same process. National accrediting bodies and regional accrediting bodies are reviewed against the same criteria by the same staff at the U.S. Department of Ed, reviewed by the same National Advisory Committee on Institutional Quality and Integrity, MHECC, and then they make recommendations to the U.S. Secretary of Education, who makes the decision. So SARA is open to institutions that meet other qualifications and that are accredited by an accrediting body recognized by the U.S. Secretary of Education, be that a national or a regional accrediting body.
Great, thank you. Here's a question. Do clinical and field experiences for traditional non-online programs fall under state authorization rules, and will they be covered by SARA? And I can say yes, they're covered by state authorization rules, and depending on the state, there are different things you will need to do in order to have your clinical placements, your experiential learning, your practica happen in other states. These experiences are covered by SARA, but I think, Alan, you probably want to, or Marshall, you want to have some additional comments on that?
No, I think that's pretty straightforward. The SARA is intentionally designed to include those things. A lot of states do regulate them, some don't, but we decided to pick them up in SARA, and we're going to be tinkering with the rules as to exactly what you can do under SARA, but the basic policy is yes.
All right, thank you. Well, we only have a few more minutes left. I want to go through and I want to make some comments about the situation in Iowa. Iowa has been one of the most conscientious members of the educational community in looking at and leading the reciprocity effort, and I have to really give a shout out to the team there. They have been so careful and professional in working through this. There are some concerns that the precise wording of the legislation that was passed might not quite be what it needs to be. This is actually the case in Nebraska. They had passed some legislation a couple years ago, and they had to go back to their legislature this last spring and tweak it. We're not sure that that's what needs to happen in Iowa, but those, I believe, are some of the rumors and some of the information that is kind of poking about out there. Those, we are looking at all of that at the national and regional level, and of course at the state level in Iowa, and there will be more information coming on that very, very soon. But I know I had at least 6 or 7 questions about that today. So just know that we are discussing it, and we will be having some updated information within the next couple of weeks about where Iowa would be. Iowa is still firmly on board for joining SARA and eager to do so. They have a lot of great schools that they can offer to the rest of the country, and their students need to access the schools in other parts of the country as well. Did you have anything else on that, Alan?
No.
Okay, great. Well, then I am going to close here shortly by just drawing your attention to some of the resources here at the end of the PowerPoint. I'm going to slide 56. Here are some helpful links. If you want to know who the nationally acknowledged accreditors are, there you go. If you want to learn more about the federal financial composite responsibility score, it's there. The program integrity rules that started this whole endeavor in October of 2010, and Department of Defense requirements, which often overlap and are incumbent upon us at the same time that all of these other things are. For those of you looking for information about licensing agencies and what it takes to have your program licensed and therefore to inform students about it, I've given you several links here. I'm also, let's see, where are we now? Yes, we've got the State's Board of Nursing, Directors of Teacher Education. If you need to know more about the individual compacts and the regional agreements, those are the websites you would access. More information about professional licensure, clinical psychology, physical therapy. There are a number of fields. I couldn't find them all for you, but they, occupational therapy, chiropractic medicine, they are out there, and we'll be developing even more resources as we develop more of our information on professional licensure. And then finally, we do have the contact information for our speakers here and, of course, on those beginning slides. So I thank you all for being a part of this, logging in and giving us your time. We will be following up with our questions and answers in document form within a week. Thank you very much. Goodbye.